Welcome to Boots Off, Log On, a podcast where we talk all things farm business. A show about the business of farming, bringing you insights and wisdom from the leaders in farm business, helping you minimise risk and maximise return on all your hard work. I'm David, and I'll be your host for the show. G'day everybody, a bit of a different episode today. We've not published an episode in July due to some scheduling challenges at my end, but we will be back to normal in August with some really great guests. So in the meantime, many of you have come to the podcast recently, and if you're like me, when you discover a new podcast, you don't know what older episodes you should listen to first. All I can say is our most popular episodes have been about the challenges of people, family, employees, and our own mental health. As one of the keys to success in our modern farm businesses is getting the people side of the business right. So, if you want to take your people management skills to the next level, I recommend you listen to episode 28, The Challenges of Finding and Retaining Employees in Farming with John Boot. In this episode, John talks about the mindset shift that farmers need to make in order to attract and retain good employees, emphasising the importance of looking inwards at our own businesses and culture and outlining how good operators find and retain really good quality staff, which ends up being a strategic advantage to their business. So if you're a farmer looking to employ people, this is an insightful advice that you won't want to ignore. Also, episode 26, Farming Beyond Family, How to Employ People Successfully with Danielle McNamee. We talk about the essential aspects of employing people on farm, including contracts, safety, duty of care, and correct payment practices. We also discuss how to identify and manage risks on the farm, and the difference between contractors and employees, and the importance of inductions and the growing problem of fatigue and accidents. Danielle in this episode also shares how good HR and OH&S systems can attract and retain good staff in your business. So if you're struggling with employee management or OH&S on your farm, or you just want to see if you're on the right track, then this episode is one that you won't want to miss. And on family, episode 30, our recent episode, is a great one, Navigating Succession and the Insights on Family Business with Stuart Weasley. This is a really refreshing take on succession, and we don't talk about law or accounting much at all. We explore the crucial questions one must ask when embarking on the journey of succession planning, and Stuart shares his insights on the most important considerations to ensure a smooth transition of leadership within the family business, from assessing the family's readiness to identify potential conflicts, and we delve deep into the core aspects of this critical process. But today I'd like to replay episode 24, The Unbreakable Farmer with Warren Davies. This is an inspiring episode where we delve into the remarkable story of Warren Davies, also known as the Unbreakable Farmer. Our conversation today centres on the critical topic of rural mental health, and Warren brings a unique perspective to this important issue. Warren's journey took a turn when the harsh realities of farming took its toll on his mental health, leading him to walk away from his passion. Despite facing an identity crisis, struggling to find his place in the world, Warren's unwavering resilience, persistence and determination drove him to rebuild his life and created the foundation for what he teaches and lives today. Through his experiences, Warren now shares his story and imparts his skills to inspire others to overcome their challenges. One of the tools he shares in this episode is the Unbreakable Wheel of Wellbeing, which emphasises the importance of communication, connection, and seeking help. These are vital lessons that we can all benefit from, regardless of where we live. During our discussion, we explore the key topics of authentic leadership, mental health and well-being, and building strong communities, plus the importance of resilience, persistence and determination in the face of adversity. This episode is a must-listen for anyone who wants to learn about rural mental health and how to find ways to support themselves and their communities. Thank you again for listening to Boots Off, Log On. Now over to Warren.
with more corporate farming, aggregations and, family farms getting bigger by buying the neighbours out, even in our area. And that once again, that gets exacerbated as you get more into more remote communities. That whole fabric of community is kind of broken down a little bit. And as you said, that support network and of people around you to be able to support you and going through similar situations is not there anymore, I believe. So it's really important that we try and, one of the things that I talk about is really important about maintaining that support network and having a diverse network maybe outside of your community, if your community is so small, to be able to support yourself.
Welcome to the podcast, Warren, and I'm looking forward to our chat.
Thanks, David. It's a real pleasure to be chatting with you today, and hopefully, well, obviously we'll probably go off on a few tangents, but hopefully we cover off on a few things today for those that are listening.
Yeah, I know. We'll just have to get a bit more tight. Warren and I had a conversation a couple of days ago, and it wandered all over the place, didn't it, Warren? So we'll just try and keep it a little tighter today.
Yeah, no worries.
Hey, Warren, now we're going to be talking about a really important topic today, namely mental health. But before we, especially in rural areas, which is one of your core missions in life, but before we get into that, you now work and live and you're involved in rural, but you didn't grow up on it. It's unlike most people I spoke to. You didn't grow up as a farm boy initially. So can you tell me, you're a city boy? You're in Melbourne, is that correct?
Yeah, no, I grew up in Melbourne. Yeah, so it's probably it's probably more. There's more people than you think that actually grew up in the city and then moved to the country. But yeah, it's probably a unique experience that, as a kid growing up, I grew up in the outer suburbs of Melbourne at the foot of the Dandenongs, like the Dandenong Ranges or in them. I lived at Cockatoo. We lived as a family at Cockatoo for a fair while. And it wasn't, my dream job was to be a park ranger. So I wanted to be a national park ranger. That was my dream job. So, the outdoors always appealed to me, but never in my wildest dreams ever thought that, my career path would be in farming and dairy farming in particular. Even though we had friends, that were down in Gippsland that were on farms, we used to visit them. I always think farming was about tractors, motorbikes, and slug guns. That's, that was farming for me. It was never in my wildest dreams ever a career path that I thought that I would pursue. So mum and dad were small business owners. Dad was a butcher by trade. They owned milk bars and takeaway food shops and butcher shops. And when we were in Cockatoo, mum and dad were the postmaster and postmistress in at that stage, a small town. So it was a bit of a variety of things. So park ranger was always that thing that I wanted to be, but my educational prowess probably didn't allow me to pursue that goal. So farming ended up being my career path.
Yeah, so you ended up, your dad, it sounds like he was a serial entrepreneur in a way, and then that led into farming. So at 15, I think you ended up on a farm. They dragged you out of the city and stuck you on a dairy farm.
Yeah, well, we did. Dad had always kind of harboured this dream, I think, of being a farmer. Don't know why. He always did, and and it couldn't have been he'd obviously made this decision that we were going to move, and couldn't have been at the worst time because it was in the early 80s in the Golden Valley. It was probably the worst drought at that stage that the Golden Valley had ever faced. So moving mum and my sister out of suburban Melbourne in a nice brick veneer house, concrete driveway, nice garden, all that sort of stuff, out to this weatherboard home with, kind of slightly slanted floorboards and, obviously in the middle of a drought, surrounded in dust. And, I can remember the day we moved was Cup Day of that year. And there was a big windstorm and, big dust storm and all that sort of stuff. So it was like you were moving into the apocalypse kind of thing. But for me, it was like a great opportunity that I've been struggling a little bit in Melbourne with schooling and a number of other things. And, moving to the country was a great way to reinvent myself and I suppose pursue that farming goal of tractors, motorbikes, and slug guns.
Yeah, even though you arrived in your so-called, I've got this picture of some American, a dusty Midwestern thing in my head. Anyway, but you arrived to this dry farm, but it obviously got in under your skin. So you, because you eventually went and bought a farm yourself.
Yeah, well, I suppose it was schooling, and I always say this with a bit of always careful how I say this because it sounds like I'm downplaying farming, but it wasn't. It was just that was a career because schooling wasn't, my best place to be. School was not where I wanted to be, and I'm self-professed. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, in particular when it comes to schooling. But that's not downplaying the role of agriculture, and these days you basically got to be well educated to secure any job in farming. But it wasn't long, about 12 months after we'd moved to the country, as a 16-year-old kid, I wanted to leave school, and farming was the career that I chose. And I was lucky enough, I worked for 6 years as a farmhand for one of the best farmers in the district. And he promised to teach me everything I needed to know about farming, and he basically did. So as a naive 22-year-old, thinking I knew everything about the world and everything about farming, started to look at my options of how do I get into farming? How do I become my own boss? And, I had thought I'd, had enough of working for someone, because I had a lot of friends who were generational farmers, and it all looked easy for them because they left school and went back on the farm with mum and dad. And, every second year they got a brand new tractor, and every other year they got a brand new ute, and, thinking, that's where I want to be. I don't want to be this, farmhand for the rest of my life. So I'd proposed to my girlfriend. So we were getting engaged. We were engaged, and we were getting married the next year. So it was a perfect opportunity. So I started looking at share farming or leasing or, all the options. And opportunistically, 200 acres come up for sale next door to mum and dad's farm. And we ended up, per to why, as a couple, we purchased that as a standalone block of land, but obviously it was next door to mum and dad's, and with the idea of just putting a bridge over an irrigation channel and creating a family business. So that's what we did. And even for that 6 years working as a farmhand, it's still, farming was just a job. And it wasn't until I become my own boss where it became a real passion. And particularly, even though I thought it was about tractors and motorbikes, I really hate small engines and fixing them. But when it comes to animals or that was where my passion, being my own boss, that was ignited, and that passion just grew over the years, trying to get the best out of animals, look after them the best that I could, and try and get as much productivity out of them in a kind of sustainable way pushing the envelope fairly well. So that's, that was the start of my journey as that 22-year-old.
Wow. And now you're a father of 5? Did I read that correctly? 5?
Yeah. 5 kids.
Like busy man.
Ironically, 2 of them are now back dairy farming. So, which is one of my second eldest sons doing a degree in doing an ag degree at the moment at uni as a mature age student after being a cabinet maker for 10 years. And my youngest daughter who's just finished year 12's now working on a dairy farm, so milking cows. So it's going around full circle. So I become the knowledge bank. Everyone texts me wanting to know, what's wrong here? How do I fix this?
So now you're a farm advisor to all your kids.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Become a family farm consultant.
Yeah. Now, the reason I came across you, you came to my attention was the amazing work you've been doing about rural mental health. And you said your mission to me was to create awareness and education around rural mental health, I think you also said to remove the stigma and the challenges around that.
Yeah.
Before we get into that in detail, and then you speak a lot publicly. This is probably your main profession now, and you talk a lot about, and it's all centered around resilience, persistence, determination, leadership, and personal well-being. And you're well recognized for this now. So your journey from farmer to this is obviously been, and interesting is probably not the right word, but a challenging one. Can you take us through the journey from dairy farming, passionate dairy farmer to your career in life at this point? Father of 5, professional speaker, etc.
Yeah, well, I suppose that journey started as that 22-year-old, and as the business developed, we faced a couple of challenges, and I kind of alluded to leaving Melbourne was a good thing. There'd been a few challenges in Melbourne with like schooling and bullying and fitting in, and I hadn't really acknowledged or identified, but I'd been struggling with like anxiety and low self-esteem from a fairly young age. But I think there's an underlying theme to my story, and that's I never did anything about it. So moving to the country was just a way of pushing it under the carpet, leaving it there. And it wasn't until we started getting into our business and we started facing a few challenges. The first challenge, and I'll always say, when I went into business, it was with mum and dad. Obviously, we joined and made a family business. So anyone that's listening that's in a family business knows that could be fraught with danger at some stages.
Yeah.
I went into business with the bank because they lent me the money to be able to purchase that couple hundred acres, but also went into business with a silent business partner, and that was Mother Nature. And I never really treated her with enough respect, I don't think, or just thought that, whatever she threw at me, I'd be able to overcome. And the first challenge was a flood. It was 2 years into our business. It created, sat us really on our backsides financially because we were non-generational farmers. We were trying to build the business. Mum and dad were still finding their feet. I was still finding mine. So it was a massive event, and it kind of triggered what I now call my mental health journey, which is, just the stress of that event, because we were impacted for, quite a number of weeks as far as, pasture underwater, and it was at peak production time, and we'd lost all our hay that we had locked up. So, but my focus was trying to overcome that, like as a business, as a farm, and really never focused much on my own mental health. But it had just triggered, and the best way I describe it was like a cloud above my head. Then we recovered from that event, moved forward another couple of years, and then the family farming business relationship started falling apart, and the personal relationship between my mum and dad and myself also fell apart. And that was mainly brought about by our visions of the farm business went in two different directions. They didn't want to grow. They wanted to slow down. I wanted to buy the neighbour and get bigger and do all the things that smart young blokes want to do.
Yeah.
And so once again, family is my number one value. So that had a massive impact on my mental health as well. So that cloud ended up turning into a bit of a spiral. Once again, didn't pay any attention to that really, or any brush it to the side, because the focus was, well, how do I fix this problem? How do I fix the relationship between my parents and myself? And that was my solution, was buy them out of the farm, which then took on debt with more stress. But I was then my own boss and the master of my own destiny. My wife and I sat down at that stage. Mum and dad moved into the town. The relationship was, mended and on its way to be sorted out. But now here we were on the farm by ourselves. So we sat down and worked out a 10-year plan. And that 10-year plan was devised between us and our advisors. And 2 years into that 10-year plan, or 18 months into that 10-year plan, everything was going really well. And then Mother Nature come along again and sent a drought. So that really tested that plan. In the first year it was fine. Second year of the drought, things got a little bit tighter. But as the drought progressed, so did my spiral. So I ended up, as we entered that third year of that drought, my mental health was in a really bad way. I'd hit a real, rock bottom, but at the same time was still focusing on my farm business and paying little attention to what I now know was the number one asset on that farm, and that was me. Because without me, that farm didn't operate at 100% anyway. So when I hit rock bottom, it was really challenging, scary, dark time. But life gave me two choices at that moment, and that was to, I could either continue along that path or I could get better, and I chose to get better. And that was the start of this journey that I was on. But not long after that moment in time, I suppose, we actually walked off our farm. The drought was moving into its fourth year. We were emotionally, physically, and financially exhausted, and we decided, I'd been offered a job in South Australia managing a farm. We decided to up stumps, move the family. So at that stage, we had 4 kids and 1 on the way. So we moved to South Australia. We couldn't sell our farm. We left it. No one wanted it. And the day we moved, we were moving to South Australia. As the furniture van went across the bridge and out through the front gate, I kind of stopped and symbolically, clipped my identity and hooked it on the front gate, because that's who I believed I was. I was Warren the farmer, even though I was, a husband, father, son, brother, mate, all those things, community member. My whole identity was tied up in that farm. It was my 24/7. It was my everything. It wasn't just a job. It was, a business. It was, my home. It was my passion. It was where my kids were brought up, and, walking away from that. So that's the biggest challenge that I've faced now moving forward was, what is my purpose and identity? And that led me to do the speaker course, which then, kind of led me to getting my first speaking gig. And I didn't really think I had a story to share, but, proof in the pudding says, 6 and a bit years later down the road, and I'm getting to travel around Australia and share my story and work in communities that, were either being affected by drought, floods, bushfires, or, or mental health is, obviously with rural communities is a big challenge. So I get to go out and speak in those communities, which I'm pretty proud of and just love doing. That's my passion.
Yeah, I want to come back to identity in a little bit, though. We'll put a peg in that one. But you just mentioned about mental health in rural communities. Do you believe that the mental health challenges in rural communities is a growing issue? Is it an issue that's not going away, but actually getting a bit worse? Or what are you seeing when you're out there with these communities?
Look, if I talk about what's talked about in the news, is that, mental health in rural regional communities and mental health in urban communities or metropolitan communities isn't much difference. The statistics say that. It's just the access, I suppose, to the services to be able to deal with that. So when we say they're the same, but the access, or people gaining access to mental health services in rural, remote and regional communities is less and harder to achieve. That's what's said in the news. What I see personally is that there is a lot of challenges. I don't know if over the last 6 years, I don't believe it's probably getting worse, but there's been a lot of challenges thrown at rural communities, i.e. the bushfires, the drought, the floods, which has had a massive impact on the mental health and well-being of rural communities, and only exacerbating that access to services, which, just creates this snowball effect. People are struggling with their mental health, but they can't access services, and or not regularly enough, or whatever that is. It is probably a growing problem, but it's a growing problem across the board. It's just the access for rural communities is, a lot limited, and there's lots of issues around that. Whether it's obviously the isolation of the communities, or whether it's even in the larger communities. Like at the moment, it's the housing crisis. So getting doctors to towns, getting doctors and mental health professionals to towns is hard enough, let alone then finding them somewhere to live because of the housing pressure and that's basically across the board, across the country. So, all these things exacerbate those problems. So, which makes it then harder for people to reach out and, talk about where they're at with their mental health.
You and I both grew up in rural communities where we all had the communities, there's a lot more people. We talked before about when we were on the phone a couple of days ago about we used to have a local hall where they used to have dances and maybe badminton and tennis club, those sort of things. And all rural communities, they seem to have either disappearing or have already disappeared. So is the fact that, like in the district where I grew up, there probably would have been 25 families when I was a teenager. Now, though, there's only 3 that farm the whole district. Is this sense of, the farms are getting bigger and in many cases more profitable, but the communities are getting very, very small. And so not many people can support a footy club anymore. Not many people. So those networks that used to support each other are slowly eroding. Is this a new challenge or a continuing challenge for all rural areas, this shrinking of community?
I think it's just a continual thing. So if I go back to when that day that I left school, Mum said I could leave school. Every night after school, I used to jump on my motorbike and I'd ride around, and everything where I live in the Goulburn Valley is basically in square miles, mile long road, and I'd do a square mile a night. And back in those days, there would be 4 or 5 dairy farms within that square mile. Now you'd be lucky to find one in that square mile. So each dairy farm obviously had a family and, all that sort of stuff. Now they're, with more corporate farming, aggregations and, family farms getting bigger by buying the neighbours out, even in our area. And, and that, once again, that gets exacerbated as you get more into more remote communities. That whole fabric of community is kind of broken down a little bit. And as you said, that support network and of people around you to be able to support you and going through similar situations is not there anymore, I believe. So it's really important that we try and, one of the things that I talk about is really important about maintaining that support network and having a diverse network maybe outside of your community, if your community is so small, to be able to support yourself.
So if, this is not a challenge for just one person or a couple of people, it's a community challenge, this mental health. So how do we as individuals and as families and as communities work to both, manage our own mental health, a lot like our physical health? So what are the tools that we can put in place, or even to help us out?
Yeah, well, obviously, we've got to be aware, and that's part of my mission around education and awareness. It's understanding. Like if I go back to my story and I talk about growing up and not really understanding that I was really struggling with, anxiety problems. It's about having the awareness and education to know some of the signs within yourself or within people around you, which, is a real open-ended question, really, because people ask me that, or what are the signs? Well, they can be as long as a piece of string kind of thing. But, just simple things like behavioural changes or, I think we talked about, putting on weight, or so you notice someone's, normally well kept, or their farm is well presented or whatever, and all of a sudden that starts to decline. There's generally an issue going on, and whether that's mental health or financial issue or a relationship breakdown or something like that. And we need to be aware of these things. And I think one of the things that we do as humans, we don't like to stick our nose in other people's businesses, but at the same time, that's what community's about, is kind of understanding what the person next to you is going through. And we need to understand, some of these signs so we can not intervene as much, but just start that conversation. So, we start creating that safe space that, and break down that stigma so people are more willing to, put their hand up and say, look, I am struggling and I do need a bit of help, but where do I get it from? And understanding, well, where do you get it from? And what do we, and how can we best support each other? So there's lots of tools, but simple things like just opening up that conversation, being empathetic and understanding to someone else's challenges, even if you're not going through them yourself. Be caring and understand that, if you find someone that's struggling with their mental health, you don't need to know all the answers. You don't need to have advice. Sometimes just listening to their problem or listening to their challenge is all that's needed. They might just need to get something off their chest. Particularly, I found working in, southern Queensland and that during the drought where, people were that busy dealing with the drought, they hadn't seen neighbours for, 6, 8, 10 weeks, and they only live a couple of k's down the road and they hadn't seen their neighbours. So hadn't had that communication or that opportunity to offload, the things that are, chewing them up a bit inside, which is chewing up the neighbour inside just the same because he's going through exactly the same thing. So I think, just simple things like that conversation and communication is really important. And then, part of that awareness and education piece is then knowing what's around and what's available as far as support goes. There's heaps of resources on the internet, as far as understanding where you're at with your anxiety or, you might be just having a crap day. Simple as that. That doesn't necessarily mean you've got, a mental illness. It might be just, you've copped a few challenges over your last 6 months and it's just compounded and you really just need someone to talk to. And so knowing where those are, and obviously again, as we get further away from regional centres and more into remote communities, some of that stuff's hard to access, but there is some really good internet-based support systems there where you can, reach out and talk to, qualified professional mental health practitioners and get the help that you need. And, obviously if it's a serious enough problem, other intervention will have to probably take place and you might have to travel to one of those regional centres to get some more support. But, that first step, that communication, that conversation is a really important bit.
And I'm talking from a bloke's point of view, but we traditionally have been pretty bad at those conversations. I know from my wife and her friends, they tend to be much better at saying, no, I'm having a shit day, and they just get it off they tend to be better at getting off their chest. I don't know if they're necessarily great at it, but they're certainly a lot better than me and all my mates. So this, I don't know what we call it, these blokey walls that we put up. Am I just being a little bit, simplistic to say it's a bloke problem? But for me, it's kind of like asking your mate, is he okay? But then also, if it's you having the conversation to say, no, mate, I'm not good. Or the other thing is, if they do say that, then the language or the structure to support them, because sometimes if they responded, no, I'm not good, then sometimes you might sit there and go, well, God, I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
So do we need to arm ourselves a little bit with some words maybe?
Yeah, words. And, I always say this, and this has not been derogatory to any mental health initiative in Australia. And so I don't never want it taken that way, because everyone that's doing something about the mental health of our communities is doing a good job and everyone plays their part. But if I'm in a room of people, and particularly blokes, and if I go, if I ask you the question, are you okay? What are you going to tell me? And most of the time, especially in, those rural communities where most of the blokes are sitting with their arms folded and, there's 1,000 Land Cruiser utes parked out the front of the community hall that I'm speaking in, they'll all just nod their head, as if to say, yeah, I'm all right. But you can tell that they're...
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good, mate.
I'm good, mate. I'm all right. Maybe he's not, but I'm all right, And that. But so that's why I do what I do. That's that second part of my mission about inspiring conversations is by sharing my story. Hopefully that empowers other people, and blokes, particularly because we aren't good at talking about that, to go, well, like, shit, he's been through this and he's talking about it. Maybe I should talk, to someone about how I'm feeling.
Yeah, we wouldn't play through a footy injury, would we?
No.
It's,
and back in the old rough and tough days, we'll get back out there. Your arm's only broken, toughen up your bars like that. Those days are gone, and and people, I find, 90% of the time, any community I go, and there'll be a few old tough buggers in the audience, but I'm finding all different age groups, from teenage, particularly like this is when we're talking about boys, teenage boys to, middle 70s and 80-year-olds coming up and going, well, look, I struggled, especially the older fellas say, look, I struggled through a bit of that back in the, the 70s when we were shooting our sheep and, but had no one to talk to. And, if I'd have talked about it, they would have told me I was a weak so-and-so. But I think that's the inroads that we have made in the mental health space, is that people are a little bit more prepared to talk about it, but it was, there's still that stigma attached and, that sign of failure or weakness. And as a bloke, there's a lot of masculinity stuff tied up in, I don't want to put my hand up and say I'm a failure, but, sticking your hand up and asking for help, whether it's for your mental health, your physical health, for your business, like, what would you rather do, lose your farm or, eat your pride a little bit, stick your hand up and say, listen, I want to save me farm.
Yeah, and also how important your mental health is to your farm. So I did a podcast with a client of ours last year, and the thing that I remember from that hour I spent with her was she said strong family is a strong business. She goes, my priority all the time is my family.
Yeah.
She goes, she goes, everything from succession to meetings to getting together. She goes, because my policy is if we have a strong family, our business will run well.
Yeah.
As opposed to a lot of people who focus on their business in spite of their family. So it sounds like a lot like that. If you look after, you're saying if you look after your mental health, that's actually a good business decision as well.
Well, as I said, as part of my story, didn't realise I was really the number one asset on that farm. That's not pumping my own tyres up, and it's only because I was, my wife was equally the number one asset on that farm. It wasn't the tractor or the header or the new milking shed or whatever you've got, those other things. It's actually you're the one that's running that business. And if you're not operating, at your optimal level, well, then things start to fall apart. Strong families are, and, when we had that family bust up on the farm, it just basically ground our business to a halt until we sorted it out. Whether we sorted it out the right way or the wrong way, don't know. Obviously it fixed the family relationship, but we need to, it is. And it's funny, I do a lot of speaking gigs where one of the other speakers might be a succession planner.
Yeah.
And, and I've worked with, consulted with a couple of farms where, basically dad was 85 and he died on the bed that he was basically born on, and he still had the checkbook in his hand as he passed away. And the 55-year-old or 60-year-old son has never written had never written a check on the farm or done anything on the business side of it. He just worked his butt off. So that's not succession planning, and that's creates divisions. And, a couple of other brothers on that particular farm had already left the farm because they were over that. They wanted, more control at an earlier age and never got it. So, it's a big thing. Families play a big part in creating a really strong business, and strong families then create strong communities and resilient communities. And, so if we all start supporting each other and try and get back to, even though we all live in a little bit more of an isolated world these days, like particularly in rural communities where it's not that, 5 or 6 families on the 1 square mile, if we, create those support networks and support each other, well, we can become more resilient as a community, I think.
And the importance of family health as in both in the context of as a unit, in that case becomes even more important, because if there's less community in the context because there's less of you, then you are spending quite a large amount of time with your nuclear family. They become quite a integral part of your social network in fact, don't they?
Well, especially in remote communities, they are your social network. And, going together there, like when we moved to South Australia, even though it wasn't a remote community, it was a fairly, like every farm was a big farm. And, the importance of catching up with those neighbours, and it was generally Stitzel night at the local pub, which was just the pub out in the middle of nowhere on a Tuesday night, was when everyone come together, and at least you could talk about, you mightn't see them for the rest of the week, but it was a good time to get together as a group. But when you're isolated on a family farm, family relationships are really important, but also having the strategies in place where you have time for yourself, and it's not all overwhelming, and it's not like living in a fishbowl or anything like that. Because, to have healthy relationships, you've got to have that time away from each other as well. So there's lots of, we could talk for hours on strategies on how to, best deal with that. But it's a whole different conversation. But there, obviously, you've got to set boundaries, and you've got to have time for yourself. And, there's got to be equal delegation across that family to keep everyone engaged and keep everyone, especially if, people are struggling with their mental health, to be able to support each other as well. Like, understanding all those, little signs and that when someone might be struggling, because you could be going through the same situation, but everyone handles things differently. And sometimes it gets on top of people, even within your family, and where you mightn't be feeling that. You've got to be empathetic to their feelings as well, and make sure everyone is equally supported.
Yeah, definitely. Now, you talk about a wheel of well-being, and I really love that idea. So this is, from what I can gather, and I'll let you explain it, a way for you to check in on yourself on a regular basis, say, am I good?
Yeah.
Or to be balanced. Can you take us through your wheel of well-being?
Yeah, so I suppose we've talked about, how do we look out for the people around us, but we've also got to look out for ourselves as well. And, there's a number of things that we can do about that. And there's 2 probably things that we spoke about off air, and they're really the key things without going through all the other stuff. But one of them's what I call the unbreakable wheel of well-being. And why I went for a wheel to best explain this is because most people have got a concept of what a wheel is, and you've got an outer rim, and then you're in a hub. And if you look at your well-being domains, like emotional, social, intellectual, vocational, relationships, your mental health, your physical health, they all create the spokes of this wheel. And if you sit down and do an exercise, like whether it's once a week or once a fortnight or once a month, whenever it is, and rate yourself 1 to 5 on each one of these well-being domains, thinking in your head that they're spokes. So 1's being like you're really struggling, and 5 is obviously excellent. And then you start drawing this picture, and you've got your rim of your wheel, and you've got your hub, and you start drawing your spokes. Well, if you say your social domain is really struggling. So you might be at a 1, but physically you might be a 5. So all of a sudden you can look at that straight away and know, well, wheel's going to be unbalanced straight away, but you go and end up doing all the others, and you might have spokes that are 5 because you're really good, feeling good about one part of your life, but you might be 1s in the other, and then all of a sudden you can see that your wheel's unbalanced. And if we know anything about wheels, if your wheel's unbalanced or you've got uneven spokes, all of a sudden that wheel's going to start to wobble. It's going to start to shake and shudder. If we keep ignoring that and those uneven spokes and keep driving that wheel long enough, it will eventually fall off. And we don't want that to happen. So rating yourself 1 to 5 on each one of these wellbeing domains, and then working out, well, how do I, what are my goals in each one of those areas, in each one of those domains, and how can I focus and prioritize my energy and my time to try and balance that wheel the best I can. And the best way I can describe that is I did this talk in a remand centre in Melbourne, and a prisoner come up to me afterwards, and really I'd paid not enough attention to how powerful this exercise is. And he come up to me and goes, look, I've visualised that unbreakable wheel of well-being in my head. And this guy, just to paint the picture, he'd been incarcerated for a number of years, and I think for every one of those days that he was inside, he'd lifted weights, and he had the biggest arms I'd ever seen on a bloke. And he came up to me and he said, well, physically I'm a 5. And I said, look, dear Freddie, have a look at your arms, like you're huge and you're quite a specimen. But he said, socially and emotionally, I'm not even a 1. So actually when I look at my wheel is actually a triangle, and I'm stuck. I can't go forward and I can't go back. And I need to refocus my energy and probably put the weights down for a bit and do some self-development on my emotional and social well-being. Like intellectually, he said, look, he was probably a 4 because he was probably a fairly smart person. So he needed to work on his social, emotional stuff. And because one thing he was scared about was getting let out, which was part of this program that these guys were in. Getting let out and then ending up back in jail. So he was made a promise to me kind of that night that he was going to put his weights down and focus on his social, emotional well-being. So it become really clear to me that this is an important exercise. So I do it myself just to try and find out where I am. And, it's important to understand that even if all your spokes are a 1, your wheel's still balanced. Obviously, you've got a lot of work to do, but your wheel's balanced. But if you've got 5s and 1s and 3s and 2s, you've got to start looking at the areas, and whether that's, your relationships or your finances or your business or whatever it is, you need to start focusing on those things that will help you balance that wheel out, because all those things have a massive impact on our mental health and our well-being.
Does it stop us making assumptions? So one of the things we always hear is, that person's, essentially seems to have it all together. They're intelligent, they're healthy, they're whatever, good looking. I don't know, whatever it is. They've got a great job, but they're really suffering. And we make these assumptions they shouldn't be suffering because from what we can see, it looks like they've got it all together.
Yeah.
Does this understanding this wheel mean go, well, yes, they might, like you said, this guy's got big muscles and super intelligent, but the rest of his wheel is a complete disaster. So understanding that people have this wheel.
A perfect example is like, say we wait, or even look at the farming scenario, or you can look at a corporate scenario and you look at manager of a big farm or a big station and you think, well, he's got the best job and he's got, all lucky, he's packaged, he's got a house and a car and his fuel and everything, and it's like a really good job, and he's making, whatever he's, what you've assumed that he's making or she's making, but his wife's left him. So all of a sudden his wheel's not balanced because his relationship's broken down and one of his spokes mightn't even be in existence. So all of a sudden his wheel's wobbling already. It does break down those assumptions and think, well, from a distance he looks like he's got it, well, she looks like she's got everything, but one of those spokes is which then has a ripple effect, because once your relationship breaks down, well, then your social bit breaks down as well, because you've probably always done stuff as a couple and as a family. And so then all of a sudden, two of your spokes are now not at a 5 or a 4 or a 3, now they're at a 1, and your wheel's really starting to wobble. So, understanding, it's probably the old adage, you don't judge a book by its cover. So that's why this exercise is really good. It gives you a better perspective of where you're at, I think, as far as those things that really impact your mental health and your well-being.
Yeah, and we see that more and more, like farmers, like we said, the farmers are getting bigger and bigger, and they're on the outside, they look, if I look at our clients and farmers across Australia, they're on the outside are looking very successful, but we can't make that natural assumption that everything's okay in their life just because they've got a big farm and a nice car.
Yeah. Like, there's challenges in everything. It doesn't matter if it's big, small, or, you've got all the flash, but everyone comes with their challenges, and the bigger you get, the more debt you've got to service, or even if you're small, you might have a lot of debt to service. You can't make assumptions. Like I used to do that. There was two things on our road. We were always the envelope pusher on our road as far as our dairy farm. We were the non-generational farmer. Our next door neighbour was 3rd generation. His neighbour was 4th generation. One guy had 3 times as much land as me and milked 3 times as less cows as what I did on that same land. Our situations were different. He had no family debt. We had loads of debt. You can't make assumptions. And then when I did leave, one of the jobs that I've done along my journey was I did real estate as a dairy specialist for 3 years. And, I used to go into a dairy farmers are renowned for this anyway, but you'd walk in and say, how are the cows milking? Just as an ice-breaking question. Oh, the cows, they're doing 35 litres. So I'd start adding these stuff up in my head, and, we're milking X amount of cows, and everything's going really good. They'd be pumping the tyres up. And on dairy farms, there's one thing that tells the true story and never lies, and that's the tanker chart, where the tanker driver writes down the numbers. So I'd go then into the milk room and have a look, and I'd see X amount of litres being picked up today, and he told me he was milking X amount of cows. Well, his cows are really only doing 23 litres, not 33 litres.
So we're seeing, what it's amazing about the rural mental health. We're seeing a lot of awareness. We're seeing the Blue Tree Project. We've got Are You OK, which is more across the board. I was in a pub in Darwin last year, and I saw this talk to a mate sticker across the top of every urinal, which is a very blokey thing to do. But, people like yourself and others, like you said, are driving a lot of awareness. So what is, I love this idea, of this, there's a lot of toolbox type analogies. I remember there used to be this, health department did this thing called a pit stop, and it used to be us guys going, and they'd say, put you over the pit stop, and they'd measure your weight and your BMI and can you touch your toes, and they'd give you a red sticker or a yellow sticker or a green sticker. And I always think a bit of that in your mental health. So what toolbox do we need both to look after ourselves? So we've got the Unbreakable wheel, but also so we can help others if they are essentially technically struggling or getting broken down. So what is this toolbox we need to put together?
Yeah, so the Unbreakable wheel is a good one for yourself. And the other one for yourself is, and I'm big on this, is understanding who your 5 people are in your life. So if the proverbial hits the fan, who are the 5 people that you'd be able to talk to? It's a really interesting exercise to do, because sometimes the people that you think you might be going to talk to aren't the ones that you would necessarily wouldn't. And like I know myself, look, I'm lucky. I've got 5 kids, I've got a wife, got a doctor, I've got a mentor that, we've never met in person, or it's always been online, but I know that I can talk to him about stuff. It's building this diverse network around yourself to be able to support you. And for me, the 2 most important probably parts of my support network are my dogs. We can go for a walk, and I can have had a crap day, and I can talk to them about how I'm feeling. I can get it off my chest. They look back at me. They still love me. They don't judge me, and everything's good. So they play a big part. So that's another thing, is understanding who those 5 people are, and that can be diverse. And I suppose the more remote you become, as far as where you live, the more diverse that network probably becomes, because you're going to rely on people outside your community. The other thing, like, there's 3 lessons that I've learned from my journey that are really important, and we've touched on most of them, but communication is key. It's really important that we talk about this stuff, and that's what drives me, by, as I said before, by sharing my story. Hopefully that empowers other people to share theirs, whether it's a good or a bad story. It doesn't matter. We need to remain, all these, in any discussion or conversation we have with anyone, remain non-judgmental and have some empathy towards the other person, regardless of what you think of their situation. You need to have that empathy and understanding. So communication is key. The next part is about connection, connection to your community. But if your community is only small, well, connection to that support network and outside of your community, because it's really important. Because one of the things I've learned about connection to community, and the most powerful thing about any community, is your shared wisdom is so powerful. And just communication with people and conversations with people and sharing some wisdom, you never know. And I never thought this when I first started speaking. I never realised I had a story to share, and probably still sometimes doubt that I have or I haven't. But you never know. You might be holding a small piece of wisdom that you think's worthless, but it could be the missing piece of someone else's jigsaw puzzle to help them move forward. So, that's where community plays an important role. And whether that's a physical community or a community, whether, outside your physical community that you can create for yourself, that shared wisdom's really important to help you move forward. And then obviously the third part, or my third lesson, is about seeking help and treating your mental health seriously when you do seek that help. And, if you had a broken leg, well, you'd be on crutches. And just because it's your mental health, or you might be struggling with a mental illness, it doesn't mean you don't treat it any differently. And you might need to allow yourself some time to recover, or you might need to, pursue more professional advice on how to deal with the issue that might be troubling you. So there's those tools, but, we talked about this the other day, and a lot of people ask me this question, like I always say, and particularly when we're talking about blokes, and, the blokes don't talk about this stuff, but they do. And it's just being aware of the language that they use around how they talk about it. And it's being able to pick up on those subtle points where, someone, for instance, might be just in love with their farm all the time, everything's good, and then all of a sudden, everything's shit today, and they're a bit down. And so there's a warning or a red flag to say, well, okay, that's a bit unusual for his normal conversation. If he continues on with that, maybe I need to ask him how he's traveling. And, and to be aware that he'll probably say, I'm okay. But if you are truly concerned about that person's, well-being, is to be persistent and keep asking those questions. And eventually you'll build enough rapport that they'll know that you are truly concerned, and they might open up to you. But it's really important to understand too, one of the harshest realities of working in this space is that you can't help everyone. You can try really hard, but some people you just can't get through to. And that's a real harsh reality to deal with, but it is a reality.
It is. But I think what I'm hearing is, as long as we're all there, we're listening, both with our eyes and our ears, and having those conversations, even if they are scary for both the listener and the asker,
yeah,
we will slowly get more used to having them.
And that's right. And going back to the point of, if you notice someone's struggling, I'm a big believer, if you're truly concerned about someone's well-being, and you might overstep the mark a little bit by asking questions, but the thing is, if it's coming from the right place, like so from your heart and your gut's telling you it's right, it's never wrong. It's always right, and you'll never cause any harm. It's when you double, think about it twice and then you don't ask those questions and then something catastrophic happens, then you'll wish you had asked the question.
Yeah, it's better to ask and be a little embarrassed than to not ask and have something go wrong, isn't it?
Correct. Yep.
And the other one I'm hearing is, depending on what bit of research you ask, 70+% of what we say is not coming out of our gob, is it? It's our tone, it's our body language, it's our everything else. So
exactly.
It's watching for that stuff too.
Yeah, and they're just little things like, you might have a community get together and a person's always the first one there, or they're the one that's cooking the barbecue, and all of a sudden they're an hour late, or they don't even turn up, and you go, well, that's out of character. Like, especially small communities, like in your own community, whatever community looks like to you, like whether it's your footy club or whatever, you're pretty aware of the people around you. So even if they're not your best mates, you still know their body language. Like I'm getting older and my eyesight's failing, so go and watching a footy game, I mightn't be able to read the numbers or see, but I can nearly tell every player on the ground by just the way they run or the way they hold themselves or whatever. Like, so I make up for not being able to see and go, oh, that was him over there. But all those little things, they're just little things that you pick up, and and I think that's part of that education and awareness, is to try and still build those tools into your toolbox, and they're just being more observant and being more understanding and compassionate towards your community and towards yourself.
And on that, last couple of things before we go. If anyone is listening to this and they have someone in there, either themselves or someone in their life that, has really hit those crossroads and they need help, what is the first, where are the places they can go? I can put all the links in the podcast afterwards, but where would you advise, if you're at that point, you go, God, I need drastic help here, I'm in a bad way. Where should people reach out to quickly?
Well, obviously, if you're in a life-threatening situation or it's a drastic situation, like if you're close enough to a hospital or an emergency triage or whatever, that's where you need to go. Otherwise, there's places like Lifeline. TX is another good one, which is a phone like counselling service where you get 10 free counselling sessions with a mental health professional, and I can give you all the numbers so you can put them in the show notes for that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And there's plenty of other resources, but your GP, if you've got one available, is a good place to start, particularly if you really know that you're struggling with your mental health, because then you can get, which is another daunting whole process, but you can get put on a mental health plan, which then entitles you to some psychology or, other mental health professional services, and, and you can be assessed, properly and without self-assessing, and, and it might be only a short-term thing. But you just need that little bit of help just to get back on track.
But we would do that for a physical illness, wouldn't we?
Exactly. And the same as a physical illness or injury, the longer you let it go, the longer the recovery. And look, and I've learned that firsthand. Yeah. That's one of my lessons. You need to get on it early, and because then your recovery, the longer you leave it, the longer your recovery, basically. So there's lots of places.
Yeah, that's really good. So we'll put all those links, and I'll talk to you afterwards, Ross, and we'll get all those links on the show notes for everyone listening. And to mention that, like these days, if you go onto your GP website, it might be not so much in the country, but often they'll book a long appointment, a long mental health appointment. So you've got a little bit more than your standard 15 minutes. So it's worth booking that time.
Yeah. So if you are, that's a definite, like if you are going to, and I just did a post on Facebook about this the other day about, questions to ask even when you're going to the GP, because it is a daunting thing, but yeah, definitely if you've got the access to a GP and you're going there, book a double appointment, which then they kind of flags that as they're already forearmed while you're coming. But it just gives you more time to discuss things and you're not in and out. And because sometimes it takes a bit to get through where you're at, and they need to be able to assess you and understand that that's just a normal process. Like, they ask you 10 questions and that gives you a score, and then they kind of, if they're really concerned about you, well, they'll ask you more questions, or otherwise they'll set this plan for you to try and get you back on track. So it's as simple as that, and it's no different to going and talking about a physical ailment. So and no more embarrassing. Like, at the end of the day, it's just part of who you are, and part of life, and sometimes we just need that little bit of help to be able to move forward.
Yeah, I like that. It's just it's not as good, it's not bad, it just is.
Yeah, that's it.
My last question before I go, I always ask this for everyone, Warren. So, apart from the time that you're out doing this great work we're talking about, and you're not on the road talking to people, so how do you spend your time outside of agriculture and outside of your speaking gigs, etc.?
Look, that's a good question, but I'm a bit of an AFL footy nut, so I love me footy. My son's playing the local footy team. One of my sons is a coach, and my daughters play netball. So that's, in the wintertime, that's what we like to do. And that's our community. Apart from that, like getting out into nature and going on some walks and a bit of camping, rolling the swag out in a few different places and having a look around when time allows that, and, being around family, and that's very important to us. It's as I said, it's my number one value, but it's something that we've tried to instill in our kids. So, family is really important. And obviously with 5 kids now, they're all growing up. They've got 5 kids with 5 partners and a couple of grandkids. So it's all starting to grow for us. So that's, that kind of fills in our life.
You're going to have at some point in the next 10 years, you're going to have a massive Christmas table, aren't you?
That's it. We will. It's big enough now. So no, it will be. And it's, that's one of those, there's all different parts of, when you look at, we've talked about how you think people are traveling, whether they're wealthy or rich or struggling. One thing where very wealthy people might be financially wealthy, but as far as family goes, we're very lucky, and that's our world, and we're very grateful for that.
That's great. It's a great point to end on. I think there's a difference between money and wealth. They're not the same thing, are they?
No, exactly right.
Yeah. So thank you very much for your time, mate. We'll put all the links in the show notes to everybody, especially those really important ones we discussed at the end, where people can get help if they need it. And I'll turn my video back on so I can see you again, Warren. And so, Warren, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us and chat with us. It's a really important topic. And Warren, if people are listening, and there's community groups all over Australia,
yep.
And they want to get you to come in and speak to their community about this message, how do they get hold of you?
Look, they can reach out to me a number of ways. On my webpage, on my website, there's a connection page. So it's just like a little page just to fill in your name and address, or name and phone number, and what you're wanting to contact me about. So www.theunbreakablefarmer.com.au, you'll find the connect button there. You can reach out that way, or email, and I'll send you all that through. So email or on Facebook, Instagram, I'm everywhere. So you'll find me at some spot. But just reach out and message me. And
good. So hunt down the Unbreakable Farmer on Google. I think I found you just by putting the Unbreakable Farmer in Google.
That's it.
And you fill up a page. Yep. So, all right. Good on you, Warren. Thank you very much.
No worries. Good. Thanks for having me, David. I really appreciate the chat.
If you or someone you care about is experiencing mental health issues, it can be helpful to speak to someone who can support you. You can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. Or use one of the resources linked in our show notes. As always, if you'd like to know more about AgriMaster Farm Business Management Software and Services, you can find us at www.agrimaster.com.au, or you can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram. My aim with this podcast is to make it the most useful podcast you listen to and to help every farm business thrive. So if you like this episode, please take the time to share it on social media, or even better, directly with at least one friend today. Plus, give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, as it really helps us reach more farm businesses like you. So together, we can make all farm businesses strong farm businesses. Thank you.